Senator from New Mexico.
Madam President, we're all coming to the Senate floor this evening to demand that we finally take real steps to address our nation's gun violence epidemic. This epidemic is wide-reaching and knows no bounds. We need to listen to the students and to the young people who have grown weary from so many shootings at our schools. In my home state of New Mexico, in recent years, we have seen gun violence tragically take the lives of high school students in Aztec and Clovis, and just last month, college students in Hobbs. Every student and teacher should feel safe at school. No parent should have to live in fear of their child not coming home at the end of the day. Across our nation, we have witnessed with grave horror mass shooters armed with assault rifles gun down Americans in churches, in synagogues, in concert venues, and in shopping centers. Amid our grief and anguish, Americans have come together to call on their leaders to not let this senseless, heart-wrenching violence continue unabated. They are calling on us to do something. We can no longer accept these horrific shootings as the status quo. In my hometown of Albuquerque, just last Thursday night, 5 people, including 3 teenagers, were shot to death in multiple shootings across our city. 6 others were wounded, and while police are still investigating these senseless acts of violence, no one can tell me that this level of gun violence is somehow acceptable. And there are things that we can do. There is no doubt that this debate brings up very emotional and difficult questions. And there are large challenges that we need to grapple with that are fueling gun violence in America. Many of the most horrific acts of violence and terror that we've witnessed have been inspired by hateful ideologies, by racist bigotry, and by divisive rhetoric. But we need to acknowledge that they were carried out with deadly weapons. Weapons that we are clearly not doing enough to keep out of the hands of those who would seek to cause us harm. We may not all agree on what steps should be taken at the federal level to address this crisis, but can we at least agree that something needs to be done to combat the epidemic of gun violence in this country? We need to listen to our nation's students and mothers who are calling for us to come together on the things that we can agree on. At the very least, that includes universal background checks. There is bipartisan legislation on background checks that passed out of the House that is sitting on the majority leader's desk right now. Let's vote on that bill. Someone who can't pass a background check should not be allowed to purchase a firearm. We shouldn't be putting guns in the hands of those convicted of domestic violence or sexual assault who continue to be a threat to their victims. Someone who has been found by family and friends to be a danger to themselves and their community should not be in the possession of a deadly firearm. And if our government has put someone on a no-fly list because of the risk that they pose, we shouldn't allow that potential terrorist to buy a gun. I can't, frankly, understand how any of that is controversial. But the Senate majority is refusing to act. They are hoping that if they hide long enough, this will just blow over. Can we at least agree that more public health and scientific research is needed on this gun violence epidemic? All of us in some way are grasping for answers on our nation's unparalleled violence. But even funding research into gun violence is being vetoed by the NRA. It's hard to believe that Senate Republicans could find a way to be against so many common sense solutions. Nearly every solution is being rejected. The overwhelming majority of Americans, including gun owners like myself, agree that Congress needs to finally take these real steps to address gun violence. Look, this is not an issue that I take lightly. Like many Americans, I am a gun owner. But with that privilege should come a great deal of responsibility. I'm teaching my two sons how to responsibly use firearms. In fact, when our family sits down to a meal that includes red meat, it is almost always from the wild game that we have harvested. I think you'll find when you talk to most gun owners, to most sportsmen, they more than anyone know how much we need to respect the deadly force inherent in these tools. And most agree that we should make sure that firearms are used responsibly and safely. Those of us in Congress should never hide behind phony arguments that use fear to intimidate us away from action. Americans are desperate for us to act. So I will join my Democratic colleagues once again in calling upon Majority Leader McConnell and President Trump. Enough is enough. It is long past time to do something, to stop hiding. It is long past time for us to finally turn our nation's grief and frustration into meaningful action to protect our kids and our communities. Madam President, I would